Hello! Well, today's video is going to be one that I said I'd do a few days ago now, based on the whole skeptical heretic and start making sense debate. One of the race tards, Topher33, put up a question, and I'd said I'd answer it in video. Apparently that's dodging if you go back and look at all the comments, which I'll put down below. But no, I'll answer this question. The question being, if the race was... oh, where the hell's it gone? 2 seconds. The question being, if racial groups did exist in the modern human taxonomy, what evidence would need to exist for you to admit that there are racial groups? If you can't answer this question, then it's nothing more than a religion to you. Well, I can answer that question, and I'm going to after the intro. It's a fucking intro! It's a fucking intro! I'm doing this temporarily until I fix a new intro scene. It's a fucking intro! Now on with the main show. Now, to answer this question, it's a fairly simple thing if you knew what the definition of race was. And that's something we'd need if it was in a taxonomical group. I asked Topher himself what his definition of race was, and it was subspecies. That's bullshit. It's not a... it does not mean subspecies. There is no definition for it in any sense of the term except from race tards as meaning subspecies. If that was the case, then blacks and whites would be subspecies of Homo sapiens. They wouldn't just be Homo sapiens sapiens, like we all are. I did ask him that question, a follow-up question, which was, if in your definition, since race equals subspecies, what subspecies of Homo sapiens are blacks and what are whites? He refused to answer that one, kept on dodging it, and indeed no one's actually answered it yet when asked about that, when their definition of race is subspecies. Now, there is this definition from Mayer, a biologist. He's dead now, like, a very prominent biologist, who said that it's an informal grouping within a species, and when it becomes formal, it becomes a subspecies, not a great race. So race is unofficial and informal, which is what we're saying when we say there's no scientific definition for it, because it's not an official one. It's just one that people sometimes use. It's not one that's used in papers anymore. But that's not answering the question. The question was, of course, if racial groups did exist in a taxonomical list, what evidence would need to exist for me to accept it? Well, that's a fairly simple one. Like I say, if it was in the taxonomical list, I'd need the same thing I need for anything in the taxonomical list. This is the first one I'm kind of working off a script, sort of. I've been discussing this for the last few days and going over the conversation. Oh, where was it? What I'd accept for the races to exist in the taxonomical list is that there'd have to be evidence showing that it's a distinctive creature with its own evolutionary ladder and a unique gene pool. Now, no one can argue that for races, especially in human races, because there isn't that sort of thing. All the genes that a white person has are also found in black people, and they're spread across the human race. There's about maybe 1% difference between myself, if that, a tenth of a percent maybe, difference between myself and someone in the sub-Saharan desert, genetically speaking. But that person could be closer related genetically to my mother than I am. It's all about how the gene flow went ahead, and that's what I'd look for in evidence for racial groups existing. Like I say, it would be, of course, distinctive creature with its own evolutionary ladder and unique gene pool, and the ability to breed viable offspring, which is essential. It's why when a horse fucks a donkey and they produce offspring, they can produce offspring, that's fine, but the offspring itself is sterile, so this offspring is not a viable species. It's not even a subspecies. It's just a creature that can. It's a creature that can't breed. It cannot pass its genes on. But this is where the problem comes in. We need a clear definition of what race is. Because if you ask any of them, they don't give always the same answers. Some say race equals subspecies, in which case you just have to ask them, in that case, what subspecies are whites and what are blacks? Because they'll never answer it. Or they'll go on to say that it's an informal grouping in taxonomical list, as in cited on Wikipedia or by Mayer. In which case you say, well, it's unofficial. That doesn't make it actually correct. If it was correct, it would be used officially. Some go on to say it means species, not just subspecies, but species, which is hilarious. That's not been used for a long time though. And on top of that, we need to know how many races there are and what makes a race a race. Some say black, some say white, some say Jews, which is wrong, of course, because it's a faith. Judaism is a faith, it's not a race itself. You could technically say it was an ethnic culture, but that's different because culture doesn't mean race. The amount of races can go from anywhere between 5 to 213, or more even, according to who you ask. They'd start making sense himself in a debate, chose between 5 and 7. Not just, you couldn't pin it down to anything less than that, 5 or 7. So it's not exacting in this discussion. There does need to be some sort of useful genetic, phenotypic and reproductive way of identifying it, which is why I'm saying it has to have a distinct creature with its own unique evolutionary ladder, unique gene pool I should say, and an evolutionary ladder, with the ability to breed viable offspring. So, the reason I'm answering it in the video is because it is a decent question to answer for those that are on the side, those who don't know which way they're going to go, those who may be thinking, oh, I feel like that, but I mean, what's the evidence for it? Well, that's the thing. They'll give you any evidence they like. Made up studies, biased studies, conclusions based on stuff like quote mining and such like. There's plenty of it out there. I mean, a list of some of the stuff that they use is heritability and IQ, which has been blown out the water so many times. Phrenology, i.e. the study of your skulls and the size of your skull base compared to like different coloured skin, blah blah. The brain size is another one I like to kick out. Another one I like to claim is that there are sharp identifiable genetic and phenotypic lines which separate them from other groups of the same taxonomic ranking. Again, the only thing phenotypically that would state that would be your colour of your skin, and that's just melanin. We understand that. It's based upon protection from the sun. And indeed white skin came after black skin. And technically it's transparent, it's not white. I mean, the reason it's coloured like pink when you look at your skin if you're white is that your skin's transparent and what you're seeing is the blood. The capillaries and the veins and stuff. That's why you can see the veins through your skin. They also like to claim that there's concepts in genetics that support the notions of race, which is amazing because they should be able to publish a publish a paper in a scientific journal. And if there was a Nobel Prize for biology, which there isn't, but if there was one, they'd have won it. There's genes, sequences, or phenotypes universal to those taxonomic rankings, but not to others, which is rubbish. And what I mean by that is like that whites have certain traits that blacks don't have, or Asians have certain traits that whites don't have, etc., etc. That the described characteristics ascribed to the races are not stereotypical, like blacks are dumber than whites, blacks are lazier than whites, all that sort of bullshit, which is bollocks. I mean, they look at this sort of stuff, and they try to claim that it is. I mean, they also like to claim that there was geographic isolation, which is funny because that's what you need to actually create a subspecies based upon this sort of thing, and there's never been that sort of geographic isolation for gene flow in human history. We certainly haven't been around long enough to gain a subspecies as Homo sapiens sapiens. We haven't gained a subspecies, we haven't created one yet. We've not had long enough time in geographical isolation from each other to do such a thing. Let me see if I can bring up something else I noticed. So, now what race realists like to bring in is uncontrolled experimental data, meaning that anyone could play with it. They use small sample sizes, like say 5 or 6 different people or types of people. They like to bring in Rushton Jensen. I think it's Rushton that is a psychiatrist, he's not a biologist. So what he has anything to say about it I don't know. About biological races I don't know. But they like to bring him up. They like to imply limitation of range by excluding people who don't fit into their hypothesis as well. And if we're going by phenotypical traits that make us races, and we don't have a clue I mean, if it's not based upon skin, as quite often some of them will say, trying not to appear racist in their race reality bullshit, they'll say it's not about the skin colour, it's about the biological evidence. And if it's not about skin colour, then what other phenotypical trait can it be that makes people a race? Hair colour perchance? Eye colour? Bigger nose? Smaller nose? Who knows what makes people a race? If it was going by phenotypes, I'd be a different race from my sister because of a massive phenotypical difference between me and her, i.e. she has breasts and a vagina and I don't. I have a cock and balls. Big massive difference. So I'm a different race from my mother and my sister, and I'm different from my father because my hair colour is different from my father and I'm taller than my father. It's a phenotypical traits. But I'm closer to my grandpa. So my grandfather happens to be the same race as me because he had ginger hair, he was tall, he had blue eyes, he had white skin. So these are all things that show I'm the same race as my grandfather, but not my father. Who I'm also not phenotypically the same as my mother, so I'm not the same race as my mother. She's small, brown haired, brown eyed. My sister has red hair, so we're closer in race than we are to my mother. She has got blue eyes, so again we're closer in race than my mother, but she's female. So, you can try and claim phenotypical traits are different, but there's a range of phenotypical traits across the whole of the human physiology. It doesn't matter what race you have, as according to them. They'll find something to try and claim a race is different. So anyway, I just thought I'd answer your question. For evidences I would accept for race to exist, you'd have to be a distinct creature with your own unique gene pool and your own evolutionary ladder, and you're able to produce viable offspring if you're going to claim it's a species or a subspecies. That's the evidences I'd claim. Of course, we don't have that in human history, which is what the question was about, of course. We don't have that in the modern human taxonomical listings for races, as they are called. I mean, blacks can produce with whites and produce viable offspring. Genetically, we are the same for gene pools. Evolutionary ladder, it's the exact same bloody evolutionary ladder. It all leads back to Homo sapiens, which again leads back to other hominids. And we're not distinct creatures, we're the same fucking creatures. The only difference is our phenotypical traits, which vary widely across the whole human species. Yeah, there's no evidence whatsoever for races to exist. Anyway folks, enough of my rambling. See you later.